So anyway, so we'll talk about psychosis as a symptom that is present in basically the entirety of the Anglophone community and a bunch of other language groups as well. I can only comment on the Anglophone community because of this body's ability to speak the English language, or some dialect of it rather, perhaps more than one dialect, and a lack of reference points for the other language groups. So we'll say Anglophone community. Now, the reason why psychosis is a symptom that is present in every single individual that speaks English is, in addition to the deliberate obfuscation of pronouns in the 1450s, which has led to a class-based misdirection game when it comes to pronouns. You is just one example of that. It's obviously psychotic because they're not necessarily telling the truth. Okay, it's an act of manipulation, lies, and confusion. So the aristocracy being psychotic in the first place. Let's talk about the history of psychosis within the English aristocracy in particular, whether or not they had French or English kings or German kings at the time. Basically, or Roman kings in some cases. So the history of psychosis in the aristocracy is as follows. They believe they have any sense of entitlement at all. They believe that their station of their birth is somehow associated with their rights and privileges, as well as their responsibilities. That is a psychotic symptom because all rights and privileges are conditional on your ability to beat up anyone who would take them away from you, and as well as your station in life being determined by whether or not your parents used a condom, not based on some higher order principle or alleged higher order principle such as divinity. In addition to that, your station of birth does not determine your skill to lead or your skill to be in a particular social position. Your social position is determined by the social conditioning of the people around you. So that's what actually determines your social status, the beliefs and practices of the people around you. So if you're raised in an environment that tells you that everyone is of equal value and has different talents and merits, you might be delusional into believing that is actually the truth. It is not actually the case. Most people are conditioned, apparently, into believing that there is, in fact, a superiority and inferiority dynamic due to the aristocracy's programming of their ancestors using the English language for quite some time. That program is evident in other Anglophone communities such as the United States of America because they do embody the principle of superiority and inferiority complexes quite well as a consequence of their enormous discrepancies in social status, income disparities, and long history of slavery. So when it comes to the idea of the aristocracy was the problem, that's not necessarily true. Thinkers such as Alfred Adler in the 1930s and 1940s sort of extended on Freud's ideas and rejected a whole bunch of them as well. What needs to be noted is that Freudian psychology isn't actually the truth as well. Freud himself had a superiority and inferiority complex, and Adler was commenting on his predecessor when he said that. It should be noticed by anyone who's ever actually read a direct translation of Freud's works in English. He literally starts off his so-called scientific, which is not the slightest, couldn't be further from the truth, papers saying he knows everything and you know nothing and he's better than you, so you should start listening to him. That's almost an exact replica of the starting paragraph of one of Sigmund Freud's published papers. That's the first paragraph. So unsurprisingly, later on, Alfred Adler commented that on this thing called the superiority and inferiority complex because their cult was talking about each other. They were doing projection and introjection on each other, and they noticed that some of their leaders, such as Freud, had superiority and inferiority complexes as well, and they were doing transference and countertransference through the introjection and projection behaviors. So introjection, let's talk about introjection. Introjection is a buzzword for somebody who is raping you right now or somehow abusing you, and therefore you agreed to it. So this goes back to Freud's mistake of saying that women who were complaining about being raped while they were on his couch were actually having rape fantasies rather than actually describing a genuine trauma, which was later discovered by PTSD researchers in the 1970s. That those women were describing a real trauma and they were in a domestic violence situation, and they were getting no help from Freud whatsoever, because at that time in history, women were classified as property and were engaging in a suffragette movement to get the right to vote. And so the art of blaming victim blaming of women in the Anglophone societies, because remember, Sigmund Freud ran away to England, despite being a native German speaker and being from Austria, he did in fact run away to England to escape Hitler. So, but before that, he did comment on the fact that the women lying on his couch who were complaining about being raped were merely fantasizing and describing the subconscious impulses of their id, which couldn't be further from the truth. They're being very direct about it. They'll say, he punched her and then he raped her. So Sigmund Freud was guilty of covering up domestic violence and sexual assault. The reason why Sigmund Freud was capable of doing such a thing is because he was enculturated by Judaism or any of the Judeo-Christian religions, or any of the aristocratic cultural societies of Europe, Austria being one of them, and having a long history of having one of the most toxic aristocracies of them all. He came in different names. One time it was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, one time it was Prussia with a P, and where they went through lots of different names, but each one of them was toxic. So therefore we have the meme in the 20th century, the 21st century, it says, ooh, the Germans, because technically Austrians are a type of German. Unsurprisingly, Arnold Schwarzenegger is completely offended by that. Having been raised by a butthurt Nazi himself, he isn't particularly keen on seeing them in the White House. And what's really interesting is the consequence of the collective minds cultural memetics that have gone on in the last 20 years. Apparently, supporting Israel is being a Nazi. So there's that. Apparently, supporting Israel is akin to not wanting Jews to burn in ovens. It's actually not the case at all. You'll probably find that there are people who are against Israel who are more likely to support Jews not being burned in ovens than people who do support Israel. Because the actual founding was Israel, so the British Empire could have the Suez Canal. It was actually 20 years before Hitler. But anyway, we'll get onto that in a minute. No, we've already got onto it. So on the subject of psychosis in Anglophone communities, here's an example of that. Here's a common phrase amongst the Christians. Jesus Christ will save you. So, thus far, the Vatican's never ponied up the dough when it comes to the census records of one Jesus H. Christ, or his mother, Mary, House of Benjamin, or Father Yusuf the Carpenter. In the actual story that they tell as it relates to the birth of the character, his parents were travelling through Galilee towards Bethlehem to do census night with the Roman Empire. And so subsequently, the actual activity would have resulted in his name being put down on a piece of paper, papyrus, or whatever the Romans were using at the time to do census records. And as a consequence of the Vatican actually being in Rome, and Emperor Constantine having once been a Roman emperor, it stands to reason that head office might have gotten a copy of the fucking data. Because they did on other issues, why not that? Anyway, so this fictional character that never existed, that the Vatican's had 2,000 years to prove the existence of, has been propagated as a normal cultural meme or construct. Oh, happy holidays. You don't want to say happy holidays. Why don't you say Merry Christmas for? Because we're not really interested in worshipping a fictional character. Worship a fictional character, you're psychotic. If you say that you're Jedi on your census in the modern times, okay, ABS might have to consider the possibility of including in their statistics if you've got enough numbers. Because a religion is not whether or not you're psychotic. A religion is whether or not you've got the numbers to tell the government to give you tax-free exempt status. And so what happened is some cults that have tax-free exempt status through the foundation, trust, and charity systems decided to develop these subcults, such as Thelema, Wicca, and the like. One branch of that, called Scientology, decided to become its own bona fide cult independently of that, without actually being independent of that ideologically, and got tax-free status as well. So the idea of religion is that People who are promoting narcissistic social dynamics using fictional characters try to claim tax-free exempt status so that their psychopathic leaders who believe in having harems of women to rape have to put up and shut up because it's divinely ordained by said fictional character. And because that's classified as normal human behaviour, and you've got to jump from one cult to another to get past it, then you can rest assured that the English language, having been born of all of these cults and modified, and doing so also modified those cults, it went both ways, is psychotic. If you speak English, you're psychotic.